You've probably done this without thinking. A message appears. You read it once. Your fingers move before anything else does. A reply is sent. The moment passes. And for a brief second, it feels settled. Not relieved, just finished. It happens in small ways, in ordinary moments, often while you're already occupied with something else. You're standing in line. You're between tasks. You're waiting for something unrelated. A screen lights up. A sentence appears, and the sense of now quietly takes over. There's no tension yet. No emotion worth naming. Just a sense that responding immediately would be easier than waiting. Later, sometimes much later, something feels slightly off. Not dramatic, not alarming, just a faint sense that something moved too fast. Most people don't notice that feeling. They dismiss it. They move on, because nothing visibly went wrong. The reply was reasonable. The decision made sense. The reaction was quick. Speed often feels like clarity. In everyday life, reacting quickly is treated as a virtue. It signals confidence. It suggests competence. It reassures others that you're decisive. Responsiveness is praised. Delay is questioned. Silence, on the other hand, is often misunderstood. It looks like hesitation, or uncertainty, or a lack of understanding, even when it isn't. So we learn very early to respond without delay, to say something, to choose something, to act. Not always because we have to, but because we've learned that movement feels safer than stillness. And usually, it works well enough. At first glance, reacting quickly seems efficient. It keeps things moving. It prevents awkward pauses. It closes the loop. The situation ends. The exchange is complete. Nothing is left hanging in the air. That's why it rarely feels like a problem. When people reflect on moments like these, they often explain them simply. They say it was instinct, or habit, or pressure. Sometimes they call it personality. I'm just someone who reacts fast. Those explanations sound complete. They're familiar. They fit neatly into how we already understand ourselves. And because they feel reasonable, they're rarely questioned. But they don't fully account for what actually happens in those moments. Because reacting quickly isn't just about speed. It's about what moved first. Every reaction, no matter how small, begins with something taking charge. Something inside steps forward and decides that waiting is unnecessary. That decision is rarely conscious. It happens before thought has time to form, before alternatives appear, before anything else has a chance to surface. And because it feels natural, it's rarely noticed. The cost of reacting quickly doesn't show up immediately. It doesn't look like a mistake. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up later, quietly. Sometimes it appears as the need to explain yourself, not to others, but to yourself. You replay the moment. You revisit the words. You wonder why it still lingers. Sometimes it shows up as a subtle sense of misalignment, a feeling that you agreed to something before you understood what it would ask of you. Sometimes it's the faint awareness that you committed to a direction too early, not wrongly, just prematurely, not because the action was incorrect, but because something else never had the chance to speak. Consider a small moment. Someone receives a message that feels slightly demanding. They reply right away, polite, clear, efficient. The exchange ends quickly. Nothing escalates. No conflict appears. Later that evening, the response returns to mind, not with regret, just with a question that doesn't fully form. Another moment. A comment is made in a conversation. A response comes instantly, witty, sharp, appropriate. The group moves on. The moment passes. Days later, the tone of that response feels different in memory. Not incorrect, just louder than it needed to be. Or a decision, An opportunity appears. There's urgency. A choice is made quickly. Nothing collapses. Life goes on, but a quiet adjustment follows. Plans reorganize themselves around that choice. Energy shifts in subtle, almost unnoticeable ways. In each case, the reaction wasn't careless. It wasn't reckless. It was simply early. What's rarely noticed is that reactions don't begin with thinking. They begin with certainty. By the time the mind starts explaining, something has already moved. The decision feels settled before it feels considered. There's no sense of choosing, no moment where alternatives line up. The action arrives complete. That completeness is what makes it convincing. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels obvious. In those moments, attention narrows. The situation feels immediate, personal, pressing. The body responds before language appears. Words form quickly. Movements follow without friction. And only afterward does the mind step in, not to decide, but to justify. The explanation sounds reasonable, often flawless, but it arrives late. What gave the reaction its speed wasn't clarity, it was momentum. A familiar internal force took charge and moved without asking. Not aggressively, not recklessly, efficiently. It knew exactly what to do because it had done it before. Nothing else was consulted. There was no pause long enough for something quieter to appear. No space for a broader sense of orientation. Just forward motion. This is why reacting quickly feels competent. The response fits the moment cleanly. It satisfies the immediate demand. But something subtle is missing. Not intelligence, not awareness, allowance. Allowance for a different quality of knowing. One that doesn't rush to conclude. One that doesn't need immediacy to feel valid. That quality doesn't interrupt. It doesn't compete. It only becomes available when nothing else has already taken control. When reaction moves first, that quieter signal stays in the background, not silenced, just bypassed. And because the explanation that follows sounds so coherent, the sequence goes unnoticed. Certainty first, reason later. The order feels natural until it doesn't. This is why the cost doesn't feel dramatic. It feels cumulative. A gradual narrowing of inner space, a subtle tightening of options. The original moment returns again and again. Another message, another decision, another response. And again, speed feels appropriate. But now there's a faint awareness, not strong enough to stop the reaction, just strong enough to notice it. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be fixed. The pattern is simply visible. The next time a response forms instantly, it might still be sent, or it might not, seen with slightly more space. And that space, however brief, is where something else becomes possible. Not action, not restraint, just clarity, waiting quietly, as it always does.